Okay. So thank you for coming to the Wednesday, May 17th council meeting, regular council meeting. Can we have the call to order?
Yes, sir. I'll do the roll call. Councilmember Holland,
Here.
Councilmember DeGolia,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis,
Here.
Vice Mayor Hawkins,
Here.
and Mayor Whitmer.
Yes, I'm here. Let's pledge the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Okay, so we have a presentation today. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month. Is there somebody from the organization here to get the proclamation? George?
I believe we have Ms. Tang online.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll read the proclamation. Thank you for making it so I can read it. Okay, in recognition of Mental Health Matters Month, this measure would recognize that May 2023 as Mental Health Matters Month in the town of Atherton to enhance public awareness of mental health and dispel the stigma around it. Whereas mental health challenges are one of the most common health conditions in California, affecting 1 out of every 6 adults and impacting both the person experiencing the mental health challenges as well as those persons who care and love that person. They're all facing the challenges together. Whereas 1 out of every 24 Californians with a serious mental health illness have difficulty functioning in everyday life, and if left untreated, have life expectancies 25 years shorter than the general population. And whereas every day, millions of people face the stigma related to mental health and may feel isolated and alone, going years before any recovery, receiving any help and getting any recovery. Whereas recovery can and does happen in all Californians should know that support is available regardless of any individual situation. And whereas creating a community where everyone feels comfortable reaching out for support, the support that they deserve is crucial to ending the stigma around mental health. And whereas access to support and ending the stigma is paramount importance to everyone here. And whereas the town of Atherton wishes to enhance public awareness of mental health, now therefore, as the mayor of Atherton and on behalf of my colleagues up here on the city council, I would like to have us recognize that May 2023 is Mental Health Matters Month to enhance public awareness and awareness of mental health and to help end the stigma. And we sign the document and there we go. So I think it's important. I think, like you said, 1 every 6 adults has some sort of problem, but then that's magnified because of the families that they're associated with. And so I think it's important, and maybe on our website, we could put some help information for people who may want to access it on their own, or for the families to be able to access that. And so I appreciate that. And we should also publicize it all with the schools as well. So thank you.
I believe there is a representative online if they wanted to say anything with this.
Would you like to say anything?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Mayor, council members, city manager, staff, and residents of the town of Atherton. Thank you for proclaiming May Mental Health Month. I really appreciate the ideas that were just said about how to really implement this in the work you do. So thank you for that. and the county, San Mateo. So I'm Sylvia Tang. I use she, her pronouns. I work for San Mateo County Behavioral Health and Recovery Services, Office of Diversity and Equity. And if Atherton would like, we would happy to consult with you all on the content of the website and if you're interested in some ideas of what to add. But I just want to make a few brief remarks, just summarizing what's happening in the month throughout the county. And the invitation is open to the Atherton community. So as was proclaimed, May is Mental Health Month, and we recognize this in San Mateo County, in California, in the United States. Lime green is the national color for mental health and represents how we want to bring a bright light to an issue that may be hidden or seen negatively. And it's really one of the best times of the year to reduce stigma, to connect our community to resources and services, and to promote our overall well-being. And this year's theme is share. So you can share resources, share your story, your lived experience story with mental health or substance use conditions. You can share a self-care practice. And so that is the theme throughout the state, actually. And we have in San Mateo County about 20 plus events in person and virtual. And we have a website, smchealth.org/MHM. And you can access that information to find those events, find different resources, and we have events in English, Spanish, and Cantonese. And I just want to end by offering an invitation of how to get involved. So you can help spread the word by using our hashtag on your social media, whether that's your personal or your organization's, hashtag share for MHM. And you can wear a digital lime green ribbon or physical ribbons that our office can get delivered to Atherton if you need it. And also we can attend, and we welcome you to attend local events, as was mentioned. Thank you, whoever put in the chat the information. I'll also add our website or other links that are helpful. And again, thank you to the community of Atherton, to the council here for proclaiming May Mental Health Month. I appreciate you all.
No problem. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. And I do think that we should put something not only on the website, but in the Friday email, because it is, there are issues all over, especially, and it shows up in the schools as well. And so we need to do our part to make sure people know what help is available and how to access it. So I appreciate that. Okay, this brings us then to public comments. Okay, so these are public comments that don't necessarily have anything to do with what's on our agenda today. As we go through the agenda, we will be accepting public comments with regards to those specific items. However, if you have time, your time is short and you would like to comment on something that's on the agenda, that would be fine as well. So do we have any public comments? Public comments are 3 minutes. Do you know public comments, any online?
None online. I just posted a message for those participating, but I don't see any yet, sir.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to close public comments. And we're going to go and find out if anybody has any comments or questions on the departmental written reports.
Before you go there, Mr. Mayor, the item before that is ex parte communications.
It's not on my agenda.
It's not on yours.
Okay.
It is on the one online.
Okay, all right, no problem.
And we'll have the Assistant City Attorney note what exactly constitutes an ex parte communication for the purposes of items on the agenda this evening.
Yeah, so when we're asking for members of the council to disclose ex parte communications, we're referring to any communication a member of the council had from any interested party regarding any item on the agenda tonight. So that could be a conversation about one of the items. It could be a text message, an email about that. And for the disclosure, we basically just need a summary of what the communication was. Doesn't have to be verbatim, just a general description of what kind of communications and what the substance of that communication was.
Okay, great. So now we'll go down We'll start with Stacy. Any you would like to disclose?
No, so emails don't count? Or
Emails do count.
Okay, I have exchanged emails with residents in Victoria Manor and the Gresham Lane area of Atherton about concerns about lot size.
Rick?
And this is any time in our lives or within the last month?
Since the last meeting.
I have had many email exchanges with Atherton residents on the housing issue, which is on our agenda tonight. I don't have any idea how many, probably more than 20 in the last month, maybe 50. I'm not really sure. And I've had conversations with a number of Atherton residents one-on-one regarding the housing issue, as well as email exchange regarding the item on the agenda that relates to the leaf blower ordinance.
Okay. Elizabeth?
Well, I think I've had an email from a resident regarding a tree issue, which I forwarded to city manager for review, and I have not responded back to that resident. I've received email copies of correspondence from the city manager, which was also delivered to all council members regarding housing issues.
I had a meeting in person with the Atherton Housing Coalition. We talked about their position, which they've stated already publicly at a position paper that they presented to us a while back. So we talked about that again, and they expressed an interest in, I expressed an interest in getting their help and their advice. And on topics such as other outstanding lawsuits that are happening across the state. They had a lot of opinions on what we can do going forward. And so I was welcoming their input and trying to figure out a way that we can reach out and get more input from the community.
Okay, I got an email from Mr. Morris on behalf of the Atherton Housing Coalition. I viewed a correspondence between Rod Shepherd of the Atherton Housing Coalition and George.
Mhm.
I heard from a resident that lives on Gresham and a resident that lives in Victoria Manor. That's it. Okay, now we can move on. Departmental written reports, and as I think Elizabeth pointed out at the very last meeting, George and his staff go to great lengths to document what's happened in the last month and how they've been spending the town's money and what activities they're participating in. You know, if you have a chance, these come out monthly, so please feel free to avail yourself of those. Are there anybody on the council that has a question or a comment on that? Elizabeth
Yes,
does.
thank you. So I just have a couple of questions on the staff report. It would be page 36 and 37, the summary of graphs. I understand what the plan, checks, permit and inspections graph means, but the graph below it says valuation and it's by month. And I note that in April, it went up to 23,793,000. Is that the valuation of the amount of permits that had been issued? So it didn't really clearly tell me what this graph is referring to in the valuation. And then on the, no, that was it on that one.
The answer is yes. It's the permit valuation, the valuation of the construction activity.
For the month of April.
Correct.
So it has exceeded exponentially the amount from April last and all the other months of the year. So I guess that means that our building activity has picked up.
Or there was one big project that came through and got a permit.
Got it. Okay. All right. So that's all I had on the reports.
You done?
Yep,
Okay.
I'm done.
Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
I had raised with the city manager questions regarding how many single-family residents have and ADUs have been built in Atherton and how many have been permitted. And on our on the report that we're looking at right now, page 33 is a building inspection that states the number of permits that are issued for various things, including single-family residences, and it shows in fiscal year 22-23, which is ending this June, 34 have been issued, and then the last fiscal year 32 were issued in that whole year. So that's looking like an increase. And it also struck me that that was a greater number than I'd been used to seeing, because I was used to seeing in the 20s. And when if you look on page 35, there's the building inspection and plan check, which the city manager has been giving us a update every month of how many new permits there are. Well, these show for it's different. It's calendar years rather than fiscal years, but it shows for calendar year 22, there were 24 single family residence permits, and calendar year 21, there were 27. And that is a fairly significantly different number. So I asked about that, and the city manager said he'd look into it and get back to us.
Okay. Since it's not the apples to apples of the time frame, I wonder if the fiscal year.
No, but
Yeah.
it gives you each month
Mhm.
on that calendar on page 35. So you can go in and do the fiscal year,
Mm.
and the fiscal year number is 24. I've done it.
You
So
did it? Okay.
so the comparison fiscal year to fiscal year
Hmm.
for 21, 22 is 24 versus 32 in this table. So there's obviously something wrong.
So in this page 33 graph, it does not break out ADUs.
No, this is just single family
It's-
residence.
Okay, so the ADU activity would be on,
Couple of pages down. There's another table underneath that. That's a new table that we just now started to include, and we'll include some
that's right.
historical.
Page
information as
34.
well. Page 38.
Page 38.
oh yeah, okay. Okay. Good.
Okay,
It looks like we're kind of on track to the 25.
Well, if you
Final,
look on-
only
if you look on
17.
page 38, then it looks like the number of ADUs that have been permitted,
Mhm.
or that where permits have been pulled for in 2022, there were 53.
That was
So that would
entitled.
be moving us beyond the number that we projected in the housing element. We'll see how many of those get final,
that's what.
because sometimes they drop out, but
What does it mean? What's the difference between entitled and permitted?
So entitled is a planning process where they've come through and gone through the planning review, and they have their entitlement to build a new ADU. That number is the 53 from 2022. The permitted is they've completed the planning process and now they're on their way to the building permit, and they pulled their building permit to actually build the unit. And in 2022, that was 25. And then the final ADU it's final, it's got a
17.
certificate of occupancy, and they're ready to move into it. And that is 17 for 2022.
Okay,
Okay,
all right.
squared away.
That's
Are
good
there-
news, a pipeline.
Do you have any questions on the departmental reports?
I do not.
Does any members of the public have a question on the departmental reports? See, okay, so seeing that, then we'll move on.
Report out of closed session.
We're going to have a report out of closed session. George, are you doing that or?
Sure. Or Andreas, were you ready to do that?
No, I just wanted to make sure we covered that item. So if you want to do it, that's perfectly
Okay.
acceptable.
There were 4 items on the agenda and there was no action taken on any of them, but direction was provided to staff.
Okay.
Okay,
And there was no
Don't-
public
don't- I
comment
would-
on any of those items before the council went into closed session.
there was no public comment on any of those items. before
That's
we
correct.
went
But
to
2 of the
closed
items involved evaluations and I believe Councilmember Lewis would like to make a
I
comment. on
do,
one of
I
those.
do. Because, as you know, Andreas is, with the law firm of,
Mona's law
Mona's
firm.
law firm. We usually have Mona on the screen. Thank you, Andreas, for being here. Mona's at the, League of Cities, legal conference in Monterey. Anyway, we did have 2 evaluations, the city manager's performance evaluation and the city attorney's performance evaluation. And it was pretty much unanimous from the council that the city attorney had been doing an outstanding job this last year. So we're going to reserve our remarks about the city managers at this time, but
Thanks.
you're welcome. We just don't want to embarrass you.
You'll know how they are. We see him at the next meeting.
It was pretty unanimously
Well said.
outstanding also.
All
So,
right, the next item is going to be the consent item. And so that is items number 1 and through number 6. Are there any council members that wish to either A, pull or B, comment on any of those items? No, I'm going to make a comment on number 3. Anybody in the public going to want to pull for discussion and see a vote on or make a comment on any of the consent items?
1 through 7.
Yes, 1 through 6.
There's nothing online yet, sir.
Okay, and I'll make my comment real quick. I understand number 3 is actually required by the state. All the information that we're paying $105,000 for is already readily available from the United States Geologic Survey. I see no need for this, however, other than the fact that we are required by state to pay a consultant $105,000 to do this. And so as we're getting into primary season, I hope that you make good decisions on cleaning up and getting support in Sacramento with regards to getting us things that actually are pertinent as opposed to pork. Thank you very much.
Mayor,
Yeah,
since
go
you
ahead.
opened this up for comment,
Oh,
I do have a
Oh, yeah,
couple.
feel free, since I opened it up for a comment.
I was just gonna go afterwards, but of the, I guess, pretty much all the cities that are listed in the subject line have already signed on for this, since it's all being paid for, yes. And so we are supposed to have a staff member represent our agency. And would that staff member be our public works, or would that be city manager, or that would be our planning?
Congratulations.
I believe it would be me, the town planner.
It's not like you don't have anything else to do.
No, he was asking for more work.
Now I see. Thank you. Okay, so that was my
Any other-
questions and comments.
Any other comments? Any comments from the public you want to add on? Okay, no problem. Let's have a vote for items 1 through 6.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, items 1 through 6.
I'll
Second.
second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, we're moving on to item number 7. This is waiving the first reading and introduced by title only the ordinance replacing Atherton Municipal Code, Chapter 2.04, related to meeting locations for the city council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a public hearing. So following my very brief staff report, it'd be appropriate to take any public comment as part of that hearing. But this is a simple change in the ordinance to change our meeting location from what it used to be at 91 Ashfield to what it is now at 80 Fair Oaks.
Okay,
It's called housekeeping.
any comments or questions?
Move approval.
Does the public want to say anything about it? Hopefully not. Okay, good. All right, so second on the approval.
Right, I do have a question. I'm so sorry.
Okay,
Because we're talking about waiving the first reading and introducing this about meeting locations. But the chapter 2.04 of the city council handbook or everything talks about, it has red lines having to do with voting procedures. Why is that?
That I think was,
Because it
oh,
doesn't,
I'm sorry. Yes, that chapter, that was a piece of the ordinance that was adopted by the council back in 1976.
Yeah.
And it related to the order in which you take votes on the
Right.
council. And you've never,
done that,
at least in
right?
the 10 years that I've been here, followed that. So I removed that from the ordinance. If you wish to keep that in there, you can certainly amend it.
means the
I would-
vice president, the vice council, the vice mayor votes first and then we
I
go in
know,
order.
but
I like that.
right, yeah. So I guess, and so in this chapter 2.04, that just kind of got tagged on to this vote.
Well, yeah, the redlining of it did, yes, removing it from that chapter. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that as part of the
It's
staff
not
report.
part of the motion though, right?
Well, you're adopting the ordinance as amended. And the ordinance as amended would remove that particular section.
Well, I don't have a problem, amending it that
Let's
way.
move on. Sorry,
It
let's move on.
wasn't part of the deal. Okay,
Okay, so we have somebody saying, let's move approval. Do we have a second? I'll second it so we can move on. All in favor? Aye, okay. Regular agenda number 8, consideration for housing opportunity site selection. This is a follow-on to a comment that we had a while ago. George?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you mentioned, at the April 19th meeting, the council reviewed the ad hoc subcommittee's report and recommended modifications to the criteria as they are presented this evening. The council asked that the criteria be returned to the council at the next meeting this evening. Subsequent to council's action, the mayor did disband the committee, so due to no further directives from the council. So this now rests with the council for a decision whether to adopt, modify and adopt, or not adopt the attached criteria. That concludes the staff report.
Okay. Any questions on that by the council? Yes, go ahead.
I want to clarify what it means to adopt it. What does that actually mean?
So from the perspective of the council, you would just be adopting the criteria as something you would follow or consider. If you called them guidelines, they could be recommendations, but they're not law. So the council could decide something different at the next meeting.
Any other questions from the council?
No question.
Public comment on item number 8. Yes, come on up.
Good evening. My name is Pam Silveroli at 99 Gresham Lane. And in review of the 7 criteria, indeed, my home meets all 6. I absolutely will not provide a letter, but what I am concerned about is that although I meet the criteria, which would include me into the housing element, my property by HCD standards, which I have submitted into public record, does not qualify because my home property space site is too small. I am below 0.5 acres, as is every house on Gresham Lane and the 2 on Selby Lane, which are continued to be brought up into inclusion for the housing element. Therefore, I have gone to great lengths to prove that we should not be included based on our size. We do not, as it reads per the code, a parcel smaller than 1/2 acre is considered inadequate to accommodate housing affordable to low-income households unless the housing element demonstrates development of housing affordable to low-income households on these sites is realistic and or feasible. To demonstrate the feasibility or development on this type of site, the analysis must include at least one of the following. An analysis demonstrating that site or equivalent size were successfully developed during the prior planning period with an equivalent number of lower income housing units as projected for the site. Evidence that the site is adequate to accommodate lower income housing. Evidence could include developer interest, potential lot consolidation, densities that allow sufficient capacity for a typical affordable housing project, or other information that can demonstrate to HCD the feasibility of the site for development. A site may be presumed to be realistic for development. Am I done? Oh,
Go ahead.
and I've also included a map of the Gresham properties, which show that we are indeed under 0.5 acres. And we've also submitted signatures that show that we're not selling, so there's no potential for lot consideration. I am in contact with my land use attorney, and I intend to file a class action suit on behalf of all those who are not big enough or less than 0.5 acres. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Tom?
Thank you. Tom Georgie with Stephanie Sargent, 425 East Oakwood Boulevard, Redwood City. I read the council staff report dated May 17th, the revised criteria. And there's a summary there basically citing that multifamily housing makes sense only on portions of the El Camino based on those criteria. And on that, I agree. Based on that criteria, those are the only spots. So I don't know if you're moving forward with this criteria, but if you do, it seems that removing 23 Oakwood follows if you're going to follow that criteria. Based on the criteria, the site, 23 Oakwood, 3 hard no's, and that's out of 7. So you need 6 out of 7. There's 1 yes, and then 3 ambiguous and vague maybes. So at best, 4 of 7 doesn't fit. Regarding 23 Oakwood, you keep talking about builder's remedy like you're protecting us from errata. Assuming by some logic that by including him in the element, it precludes his ability to do a builder's remedy, and that's not the case. As your constituent, I would prefer that you remove Oakwood and call Oakwood's bluff. Let him wait and see if you don't, get your numbers. If you fall out of compliance, he can try a builder's remedy. He'll have to deal with CEQA unless he builds affordable, which according to him doesn't pencil. And if he does use builder's remedy, you get the numbers for your RENA anyway. So might as well remove it. And because, and Councilman DeGolia talks about this all the time, he thinks you guys can get your numbers from everything else that's being proposed. And that'll keep you in compliance if you're getting your numbers without Oakwood. Now, and it's not really helping. It's 3 units. It's not like Oakwood is the straw that's breaking HCD's back. It's not. You're not in compliance. You're self-certifying. You're only ever going to be self-certified. That's all you've got, unless you rezone portions of the El Camino in a very significant way. So all you're getting from Oakwood is 3 low-income units, which for those units on your own town properties, it would be nice to start hearing you guys find reasons why you can and not the same old circular arguments about why not. What's so special about Oakwood? Why is it there? I mean, you guys agreed on this criteria. Oakwood, this criteria, they don't match. Why is it there? Doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Any other public comments? Zach?
Zach Whitman, Selby Lane. And I lived there for the last 17, 18 years. And for the last 13 years, I've rented rooms in my home. And generally the people who rent rooms and homes are not higher income people. They're generally lower income people. All of them have had cars. You seem to be pushing the direction of this, of the housing density to El Camino. And to me, it makes no sense to not include other major thoroughfares throughout Atherton. There are 5 or 6 of them at least that I think could be considered and broadened and perhaps increase the opportunity to get a housing element certified. One of the people who I took in was homeless. He had a car. The people who have cars can travel. Another item that you have, so the presence of any public transportation in El Camino to me seems, at least among the people who lived in my home, not important. I'm not so sure how important it would be to others who would otherwise be seeking to live along Selby, along El Camino Real. Additionally, people who have cars travel. The criteria of having it be near a commercial or a retail area, totally unimportant. People who have cars will go to where they want to go. The commercial areas are just unimportant, and I think that should be not considered as well. So I think just broaden it to other areas. I think there needs to be more pressure from other people in town to go up against the state. Our Neighborhood Voices is a great organization. I think the town councilors should get firmly behind it, endorse it, and just support it. And we're doing all this because of the craziness that the state is putting us through.
Thank you, Zach. Any other public comments? Any online?
No, sir.
All right, we'll close public comments.
Mr.
Yes.
Mayor, before you continue, I did have additional information with respect to the Vice Mayor's comment about adopt. Just for clarity, the adoption or approval of the criteria doesn't create any overlay zone, doesn't rezone any property, doesn't restrict the council in any way. It just provides the council with a set of evaluative criteria should a property come before the council or the council identify a property that it wishes to include as multifamily.
Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted you to clarify. Thank you.
Okay. So now we have council discussion on this.
I have some comments. There was one resident wrote into the council saying that why is safety not in here? And that might be something we want to talk about. And someone else, I don't know who it was, suggested that 2 and 3 be, I don't know, George, who recommended that we get 2 and 3 into one criteria because it's literally the same thing. We just add so close proximity to retail and then just add I forgot the words for it, but 2 and 3 could be collapsed into one just to simplify the effort.
Okay, any other council comments? Yeah.
So if you look at these criteria and you put it against a map, we are only considering small lots, as Pam pointed out. And I'm concerned that our multifamily strategy that we're considering hinges entirely on lot consolidation. And so I asked George about this. He says there might be other programs that other towns have done or zoning things that we could do. What I'm concerned that we're creating too big of a hurdle for developers and for homeowners. I don't want homeowners to not be able to sell their houses because their neighbors aren't selling. And I also don't want developers, if the goal is to, HCD wants us to create a program that sees housing built. And so having lot consolidation be a part of it feels like a hurdle that I'm concerned about. So I would love maybe in the next meeting or a subsequent meeting for the planning department to have some, tell us what other jurisdictions have done in the past for smaller lots with multifamily, if there's, densities that can work on it's like a 1/3 acre lot, I think, usually. So that's one of my.
Anything else?
Comment? I have a.
No, Stacy, anything
Oh,
else? You said that was one of your things.
Oh,
That
thought
was
you
a
said-
big one. That was the big one. I think also I would love to see this. I agree with what Zach said, that I think that I said this in the last meeting, I'd love to see this be a little bit more broad so that we could be we're essentially looking at putting housing in 2 neighborhoods. And I think that's a lot for two neighborhoods to be shouldering for the town. So I would love to reconsider other streets. And I also think if we are considering consolidating 2 and 3, the retail, commercial, and residential, I would say it should be an or.
Should be what?
Or, not and.
Oh, mhm.
Yes, yeah, that's what I meant. Sorry.
So those are kind of my.
Right. yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so, the criteria, as you know, was brought up by, members of the council to, look, if we're gonna be having to determine, what goes where, and if somebody comes to us with an idea that they want to build, and if we don't have some guidelines that say, well, it doesn't meet our, kind of benchmarks, then, it's kind of all hands off. But honestly, to me, I'd be fine without the criteria, because then it just opens everything up to, the market forces. And without the and I've heard lots of people saying, we don't want the criteria and you're not listening to us. And, by creating the criteria, you're picking on us, you're targeting us, you're, pushing us into the housing element for redevelopment. And, that really wasn't the intention, absolutely, but it was kind of with a rationale in mind as to between the guidelines that HCD and other housing consultants have given us, that multifamily should be more along transit corridors. And in Atherton, the only real transit corridor we have is El Camino Real, although we do have other arterials that move a lot of traffic, like Valparaiso, Selby, Atherton Avenue, moves a lot of traffic, not public traffic, public transportation necessarily. But, I'm okay if we don't have criteria. I think it gives, us more flexibility.
Okay. Rick, you want to say anything or?
I think that's an interesting idea. I don't know if we need criteria, but I think if we're going to set out some criteria, we have to be clear about what it is for. And right now, this says criteria for identifying locations for multifamily housing in Atherton. And I don't think that's what this is, because it's not any locations. It's only private property locations. It's not dealing with any PFS locations. It's not dealing with any property that's owned by the town. So it would be criteria for identifying R1A or R1B sites for multifamily housing. And so that's one comment. I think we need to be clear about what it is, because it clearly doesn't apply to anything other than R1A and maybe R1B. But I have a question about the R1B. And based on the public comment, and this is something we probably need direction from the planning department, if in fact a site that is less than a half an acre isn't eligible for being considered within the housing element, then we should add that as an exclusion. In which case we wouldn't be looking at R1B sites, because R1B sites are all third of an acre or less. So that
It is in the letter that we got from HCC.
3 things.
Yes, and I underlined it earlier. I can't find it now, so I'm sorry.
think Pam just read it.
Did you?
It talks about those smaller lots smaller than half an acre and lots greater than 10 acres, that sort of thing. But when it talks about the lots smaller than half an acre, as the council discussed several meetings ago, HCD would only accept identification of those parcels if the town had a very strong lot consolidation program. And so that's what you directed planning staff at that time to make sure that we included in the housing element was a very aggressive lot consolidation program. Now, that still does not guarantee HCD would accept those parcels, but that's what they would require.
Okay, all right. So my comment is several things. First off, I think it's very clear to everybody up here that everybody wants it somewhere but near them. Okay, I've said that several times. It's also should be clear to everybody that the state's going to eventually, unless there's some sort of change, the state's going to end up winning out. And so something will end up happening if unless something else happens. This criteria was put together because another council member, no one was brought that up because when there was a presentation that I made on the 15th of January, where we talked about all the different transit routes and places where it might be considered and why it might be considered or maybe not. Somebody said, well, what about the criteria that I came up with another council member? And so we were then tasked to go do that. And that's why that criteria came out. So I just want to be clear about it. I think that the criteria is not a criteria for identification. The criteria was presented as if in fact somebody that met that criteria was interested in developing their property and they meet all the other criteria, that the council, could look favorably upon proving that. But this turned into another thing where the council was being targeted and specific members of the council were being targeted as you are targeting us and we're going to, we're very unhappy and there'll be ramifications and things like that. So, at the end of the day, the council can select and approve a piece of property or not, whether we have criteria or not, as George pointed out. So I don't see a need for the criteria because it's caused all sorts of disgruntlement in the community. We're trying to work with the community, but we also need to try to work with HCD. And, as I've said several times, my position is I don't want anything to happen here. I want the same Atherton as we have today. Okay? But if HCD requires us to continue to make some progress to keep any ramifications from coming upon us, which could be very detrimental, I'd like to avoid that. And that has been my position all along. When we put together the PowerPoint, which I would hope that maybe you might want to go back and look at, which, by the way, I did present to the Housing Coalition before even we showed it to the council, but it was in the pack at that time. It's those were just some ideas based on where we might think about it. And yes, the park was in it. Yes, we looked at the courtyard. So we did look at a lot of things that have come up. So, everybody on this council is working very, very hard and, spending a lot of hours understanding what we need to do, what we can't do, what the state is asking us to do. And I'm not saying other people in the community aren't doing that as well. However, this criteria to me turned out to be something that the residents felt we were targeting them. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to vote to not accept it.
Can I make a counterpoint? And I also want to pick up on what you just said, because I will take credit for being the person who proposed
I don't
criteria.
think that's necessary.
And I still think that criteria are important. And I'll remind us why we got here. We got here because when we first started, people were randomly proposing property over here, property over there. And we would, because we had this pressure to make these decisions, we were considering all sorts of things. And it became really clear that what we don't want is to just have willy-nilly development across our city. Unfortunately, we're already going to get that with the rules that the state have put in with SB 9 and with the ADU rules that they put in. So we're already, that's already happened. But in terms of what we can control, I don't think it should be willy-nilly. And I do think it should be based on what would be city planning criteria. You're going to put, if you're going to put a development, you're going to put it where you have access to streets, where all the criteria we talked about, maybe some of the ones that you were mentioning that are in there should also be on here. So this is not a done deal, but I'm very much in favor of having criteria. Am I saying that this is what we're going to pick and this is what we're going to do? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that right now we have a proposal into HDC and we've made a set of assumptions. And when you read what they write back, the next tax that we're going to talk about tonight is addressing all of what they explicitly ask. So in my opinion, we need to address everything they explicitly ask and see where we are at the end. Do we need this criteria? Hell yeah, because maybe they're not going to accept what we have. And maybe once we get back with all the reports, we may still be back here. And I don't want to throw it up so that all of Atherton's free game for anybody. We should develop it based on what we think is the right way to develop, only if we have to. So that's my opinion.
I
Right.
would like to make another point,
Sure.
just real quickly. I just want to go back to the small lot size and what HCD says in their letter to us, page 3. I found the paragraph. It says small and large sites. That's their header. Sites smaller than a ½ acre and larger than 10 acres in size are deemed inadequate to accommodate housing for lower income housing unless it is demonstrated that sites of equivalent size and affordability were successfully developed during the prior planning period. Or, there's a lot of caveats here, unless the housing element describes other evidence to HCD that the site is adequate to accommodate lower income housing. So what they're saying is that if we can demonstrate that 1/3 of an acre, if developed into multi-family project, can provide for lower income housing along El Camino, they would, they will say, oh, okay, I get it. But as you know, Atherton has not demonstrated in the prior planning period of any development of any lower income family housing, because we haven't developed anything. Okay, that's that's just the fact. But it goes on to say, and you really have to read these sentences very carefully, because it's not just a one thing out like that. And you can't take the excerpts, because then they say, or if you can prove to us that you believe, and this is how you're going to execute it by partnering with low and moderate income developers or housing advocacy groups to do that, then maybe we will believe. So I just wanted to make sure that
No, that was good. That's good to point out.
And even the 10 acre sites, right?
Yeah, that was shocking.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Unless you could prove that you were successful in the prior plan, which we haven't been. But okay,
All right. So anyway,
Anyway.
so we need to decide to vote on this or to vote against it or something like that. So can I have a motion? I guess the motion is to,
I would like to make a motion that we do not accept the existing set of criteria as it's written today. It was, prepared with the knowledge that we had then. It's a work in progress. And we'll, sit on it for a while and see what happens.
I'll second that
Okay.
Okay.
So
I think it's
basically
valuable, but
to
I'll
table
second
the
that.
item until.
till we know where we are.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
Yeah, we're tabling.
We're voting to table.
For now.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody against? Okay, we'll move on. This is the meat of the meeting.
The meat of the meeting.
Okay,
Want
we're
my
going to
medium
receive,
rare.
excuse me?
Want my medium rare.
Okay, fine. Medium rare. Okay, that's so Song is going to be, or who's presenting?
It's good. Actually, Jeff Bradley, principal of
Yeah,
M Group's
we
gonna come
want
up
it-
first.
We want it rare, okay?
Medium
All right.
rare.
Receive the medium rare, sorry. Receive a summary of what HCD, of the 12 pages of no, he's going to summarize that of what the no's really meant.
Thank you,
Okay.
Honorable Mayor, members of
Thank
the
you.
council. My name is Jeff Bradley with Metropolitan Planning Group. I work with Sung Kwan and Brittany Bendix. Sung, obviously. Brittany's a very experienced planner with over 15 years working in both the public, private sector, long-range planning, current development review. She's our project manager on the housing element. And she'll be giving you the bulk of the presentation. My job is to introduce her. And after hearing your discussion with your patience and agreement, Mayor, I'd like to just give you a brief little background. Because before we met you, we were focused on more the development services that the town engaged with M Group, and now we're transitioning into policy planning, which is what we call it. But I wanted to give you a high-level assurance that you're in good hands. Over the last 4 cycles, we've worked on over 36 housing elements, all of them certified by HCD, no question there, including some very challenging ones in Marin County. I'm pointing to George here.
Because he lives
Belvedere.
in Marin County.
He's a Marin County guy, used to be. Belvedere, Sausalito twice, never go back there again. Mill Valley once. Now we're concentrating our efforts closer to home in the Santa Clara County, San Mateo County. That's sort of our home territory. And we're drawn to these challenging ones, and yours is definitely a challenging one, no question about it. But I'm glad you're keeping an open mind on your criteria and your sites and your strategies, and working together with the community, we'll get through this, and we'll be able to talk the language that HCD needs to hear so we can get to the finish line.
Good.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Brittany, and she'll go through the whole matrix.
Okay, can we ask a question right now? Go ahead.
Just a procedural question. So in our agenda packet, we were provided the appendix, the town of Atherton, from what HCD gave us feedback on that we needed to respond to. So are we going to kind of go through these item by item, and will they tie into the spreadsheets?
In the PowerPoint.
It's all in the PowerPoint.
It'll all come together.
I just got this
Got the
PowerPoint.
appendix,
I hadn't
okay.
gotten it before.
Plus,
You
we
got
have
that
all the
before?
words. We have all the words too in the document. Took the time to read the staff report.
Yeah,
So we want you to go through the staff report, not give us some summary, okay? You
No.
have to endure the pain we had to.
exactly.
Okay,
We'll
it's
get it.
really unfair. I'm just gonna give you. a summary.
Item A, review and revision.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question for the group? I think it'd be useful to know how many housing elements you're working on right now to reassure the group of your current expertise
We-
in the more complicated housing element.
We
world.
knew this cycle was going to be more challenging than the 3rd or the 4th or the 5th. So instead of taking on 10 or 12 from the get-go, we made a hard decision to just do 3 or 4. And those are the ones we've
Okay.
been working on for several years, or at least 2 years now. And now we're starting to pick up some of these that you just need a little help at the end. So we are doing a few of those, but I am proud to say that the Campbell housing element, when Sung was the project manager for that, and Brittany also worked on it, was the very first one in Santa Clara County to be certified by HCD, and one of the top 14 within the whole Bay Area. So we're very, very happy about that.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jeff, for the introduction. And good evening, council members. I'm Brittany Bendix. I'm a principal planner with M Group. It's an honor to be here tonight, especially because I went to elementary and high school in Atherton. So great to see everybody.
Okay, how would you like to have the procedure run? Because there are probably people in the audience that have questions, and the people up here might have questions about some of the things. So do you want to run through it and then take questions? Or take a break halfway through, or what?
I have a high-level summary prepared in the PowerPoint. I'd love to just get through that, and then we can turn it over to any questions and then open it up to public comment, followed by discussion, if that works.
Okay, great. All right, everybody in the audience understand how we're going to run it. Thank you.
The purpose of our meeting tonight is to summarize the HCD letter that was sent to the or the town of Atherton in response to the adopted element this past January, covering 2023 to 2031. Thanks. To give a brief summary of the background, the first letter that the town received from HCD was received on October 31st, 2022. The town then considered the comments in that letter and updated the proposed housing element, which was adopted on January 31st, 2023, and sent for HCD for certification consideration. On April 4th, the town then received its second HCD comment letter. And then tonight we are really going through the comments in that letter and looking at next steps. Because we have quite the volume of information from HCD, and then there were responses in the prior element, we've prepared table 1, which is the attachment to the staff report, to summarize the back and forth between HCD and the town. On the far right of the table, you'll see a column that represents the comments received back in October. You then have the response provided to the October comment letter that was in the adopted housing element. The middle column is the HCD comment letter from April. And then the first column is our proposed approach to responding to that. And then we've also included the title of the item in the comment letters and the pages in the housing element that was addressed, so that hopefully everybody has kind of a snapshot of what the discussion has been and the location of where that response from the town appears in the housing element.
So is there a copy of this in the background, George? In the back?
There is not. It's online. We can have some additional copies made.
Okay, so it's at the end of the staff report. If you're looking online, where this table is that she was just describing.
I'll also note that one thing that's very helpful in the table is to see that the town and the prior consultant has taken active steps to respond to the first comment letter. And that a lot of the remaining comments actually have to do with very specific information or details that wasn't provided previously and just needs to be added. All right, next slide. So we've broken the key areas of focus in our response into 3 categories. One is items that require a high-level analysis. This includes extremely low income households and special needs populations. AFFH, there's a typo there, sorry, stands for Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, a housing needs assessment, site inventory and analysis relative to SB 9 sites, site inventory and analysis, it's just general commentary, and then assessment of general constraints. The second category that we outlined is programmatic changes. These are comments that related to specific programs called out in the housing element. The third item is multifamily and affordable housing, where it addresses multifamily sites inventory, analysis, and program language, and then also the site inventory analysis and program language for ADUs. So we will go through each one of these bullet points, which is actually a subheading for the specific comments in the table that we provided in the HCD letters. Next slide. So the first topic under high level analysis is the extremely low income households, or ELI, and special needs populations. Really, this called for further analysis of programs both in the prior housing element and then also the currently adopted one, specifically looking at how housing issues are mitigated for ELI households and special needs populations, which address persons living with disabilities, the elderly, and female-headed households as some examples. We also look at quantitative attributes that describe these populations, a comparison of these populations relative to the town and then the region, any sort of gaps in resources for these populations that may have been identified in that analysis, and then the constraints on the town's ability to provide housing for these populations. Next slide. The next three topics are affirmatively furthering fair housing. Once we do the analysis that I just described, we then have to look at the distribution of housing units resulting from housing opportunity sites, and how that distribution of housing units mitigates any AFFH issues that were previously identified. We also have to look at a housing needs assessment, which would include specific quantitative data related to income level and tenure as required by HCD. This was really specific to overpayment and housing costs. And finally, we need to look at the site inventory analysis as it relates to SB9. The state was asking for further analysis of SB9 sites to demonstrate that the unit yields included in the RHNA assessment would actually achieve the town's RHNA goals.
So, I just have a quick question on that. Since SB9 is new, who can say whether or not our projections are right? We've had pretty good uptake so far, and so I think was inappropriate that they said, we don't believe your numbers. What are they basing that on? SB9 has been for the whole state. They can't say, well, we started it down in Southern California and look at their uptake and it dwindled off.
What they're looking for is a comparison to previous mergers that may have been applied for, or sorry, not mergers, subdivisions or mergers, and then a subsequent subdivision that reflects a development pattern that would support that assessment.
We have more mergers.
Yeah, we have a lot of mergers here, I'll tell you that, but.
Mayor Woodman, a lot of the cities are struggling to develop processes for SB9, and I know there are some cities that are processing SB9 applications. We have successfully recorded one SB9 final map, and there are 2 or 3 more that are very close to being finalized as well. And we have others that are in the wings. For small agencies like Atherton, Hillsborough, Los Altos Hills, there's much larger lots. So when they're, 1 acre, 2 acre lots, it's much easier to subdivide through SB9 and have enough development area for a new single family house on both lots.
I have a question for Shalyn. So since we do have larger lots, 2 to 3, 5 acres, instead of doing an SB9, which has its restrictions of ownership attached to it, would not the owner of the property elect to do just a subdivision map?
Yes, they could also do a subdivision for 1 acre lots, depending on lot size and lot width. And you've seen one of the exceptions that has gone through Plan Commission and
Right.
Council. And then once those are split, they could be further split, the new 1 acre lots
Mhm.
through SB9 as well.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not saying that would happen, and the subdivision map would not qualify for the SB9, or would that in itself give us another RHNA number?
Yes, it could, because so let's say there's like a 2 acre lot. It can be split into 2 1 acre parcels, and then those could be further split via
Mhm.
SB9.
Okay.
But I think in answer to the mayor's question, our argument to HCD is exactly as Sung put it. We do have larger lots here. So SB 9 actually makes sense for the town to rely on as a source of new housing units.
Yeah, but I agree with Elizabeth that lot splits versus SB 9 lot splits are probably more the case here because of the residence requirement.
You have more flexibility and you don't have that,
Okay,
residency requirement. That's what you mean.
Sorry for the interruption. Where you going? Come back, Elizabeth.
Just disrupting the meeting. I'm sorry.
I got it for you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
So the next category that we would look at under a high level analysis is the site inventory and analysis from a general perspective. In here, what the comment letter was asking for is additional analysis demonstrating items like realistic capacity. So that's demonstrating that the assumed capacity from the opportunity sites is actually realistic. That there is sufficient resource availability, that there is adequate sewer and dry utility infrastructure, that the acreage, which was a discussion item or a discussion topic on the previous item, is adequate to meet the needs of the sites and the programs associated with them, that there is some level of feasibility of developing lower income units associated with whatever the assumptions are in the programs, feasibility of developing housing on sites with existing uses. So if there's a single family home and we're looking at potentially including that site as an SB 9 site, how does that presence of a single family home dictate whether or not that's possible? And then ultimately, once we take all of that information, we have to keep in mind that if the town determines that the site inventory does not meet its stated RHNA goals and can't, then the town must include a program to address the housing unit shortfalls.
I have a question. So in our analysis, there's a big component of our analysis that deals with property cost and affordable housing being very difficult, if not impossible, if property transfers, which is part of the strategy around our ADU strategy and our use of school sites where you could build multifamily housing on school sites and Atherton residents can offer ADUs at affordable rates if we build the right program to encourage that. But is it this section where we would do that analysis?
In part, yes. One thing that comes out of the letter is that multiple comments might actually hit on the same issue. So there definitely needs to be additional analysis demonstrating what you pointed out, that whatever programs you have to incentivize the construction of ADUs at affordability levels is going to work. That's going to hit on the site inventory analysis commentary. That's going to hit on some of the program comments relative to what that program looks like. Is it defensible? Is it realistic? And then the next slide, actually, if you can go ahead and move, is how that relates to a constraint. Does somehow requiring is the ADU program constructed in such a way or crafted in such a way rather that it actually presents a constraint to housing in the future? Is somebody less likely to develop at all because of this incentive or the inclusionary housing program that's associated with it? And so there's a lot of overlap in the comments, which is another reason why it's nice to have the table and look at the back and forth between the town and HCD. It's helpful for the staff report to group how these comments relate to, okay, this is important to do high level analysis in these areas. Because once we do that, it's going to have a ripple effect into other things that we need to address for HCD. So as I mentioned, general constraints. I'm sorry, does that answer your question before I move?
No, yeah, I hear you. I was kind of focused on the suitability or the zoning for lower income households because it's not exactly any zoning difference on the ADUs. Clearly, there's a zoning issue in terms of zoning public or school property to enable affordable housing. But if and no zoning in Atherton's R1A area is going to result in affordable housing. Somewhere we have to discuss that and why, because clearly it's a constraint. I mean, the cost of property is clearly a constraint. It's not a government imposed constraint, but it's a non-government constraint. And those work together. So I can see that you can discuss it in more than one place.
Sure. So then moving along to this next slide about general constraints. We've labeled it as general because, as you've hit on, there are governmental constraints and there's non-governmental constraints. We also were requested to provide more details with the conditional use permit process. Really just, this was as simple as really including the findings that are required and a little bit more discussion on what that process may entail. Identifying local ordinances that could constrain housing development. HCD didn't think that we had done an exhaustive analysis of that or had provided that. They wanted additional information relative to the town's streamlining process for eligible SB 35 projects, timelines for all types of development review, the propensity for development applications and inquiries for below density development. So that might get to how often does the town receive inquiries about merging properties so that they would actually be substantially above what the density is. And then finally, identifying constraints that may result from the elements programs and how programs may mitigate or eliminate constraints. And I touched on that a little bit with the ADU example. Next slide. So the next topic area we had were programmatic changes. Some of these were as nuanced as looking at the incentive programs for ADUs, but a lot of them were actually very specific, adding language necessary to comply with related housing laws. An example was with the emergency shelters and group housing programs. The identification of program incentives was something that HCD asked for pretty much holistically through all of the programs, as well as specific dates and timeframes, and then additional details for outreach efforts. So if there's a program for housing rehabilitation, how is the town going to go forward notifying residents that they can apply for a program or that there's support somehow offered through the town or the county and related programs.
Yeah, go ahead.
I ask a question? Do we have requirements for emergency shelter beyond what we do by providing the Holbrook Park if there's an emergency?
Yeah, they're talking something different than that sort of shelter. It is identification of a zone in which we allow emergency shelters to be developed. So I think ours is the PFS zone that we allow that to occur. An emergency shelter has a different definition than I think you're thinking about for ADAPT in a disaster.
Right, so it's not that.
Correct.
But that's not something we're required to build. We're just a zone to allow it to happen in certain areas. Okay.
Then
So right now,
what is it then if
The
it's not like
PFS.
in the event of a disaster, emergency shelter? Like, what is that?
Yeah, what is, I don't even know.
I can look it up for you.
Okay.
Give me a moment.
You know, we've
You can
got,
get back to us,
people
it's
can
not
go
time
use
sensitive.
this. First off, for warming and cooling centers, people can go to the library. There's a proposition in our capital plan that we would put solar energy and a backup on our pavilion. That could also be used for a similar type of project if we had a problem. Those are the type of things that they're looking
That's not
for,
what
what we're
George just said.
planning on doing. But we do have emergency stuff like the county has warming centers or cooling centers, and those are the library.
Yeah.
So emergency shelters here, though, are more transitional housing for
Right.
housing the homeless or something like that.
Yeah.
If within the PFS zone, for example, Menlo College wanted to create a transitional or supportive housing area, that's something that they're looking for, that we have to specifically identify a zone where that is allowed by right.
But we don't have to build it.
We don't have to build it, no.
No.
So I think this is a good example of how the HCD comment topic brings up a lot of questions about a particular item or issue. But then when you go and you read the actual direction, it's pretty straightforward. I have in the table for emergency shelters, the approach to HCD response is just to align the discussion in two different sections because it wasn't consistent, or it presented information in one, but then didn't cover it in the other. And perhaps HCD is only looking at one space. And that was identification of adequate sites for emergency shelters, and then emergency shelters to connect, and then emergency shelters, and just connecting the narrative of the two programs was really all that we needed to do. And then another point was to expand the section on identification of adequate sites for emergency shelters to discuss availability of sites, acreage, typical parcel sizes in the presence of reuse opportunities, and any conditions inappropriate for human habitability. So that's really just an assessment of what the existing zoning is, what sites it applies to, and kind of running through the parameters of that site for the purpose of containing the information in the housing element. So it's not necessarily looking to rezone new areas or even change the zoning code. It's just providing information so that HCD can say that that's in the housing element.
Can I ask a tough question? How many of what this pages and pages of stuff is things like that are just asking for more information and clarification versus no's?
A lot, the majority.
Majority of it's just that.
Yes. And again, this is why we've put the information in a table format
Yes.
so that you can see where HCD first responded to the town, how the town responded back to HCD, and then identify what the remaining issues are. And a lot of the times it's just adding clarification. And I'll get to that actually in our next topic.
And so it's actually sort of what Jeff said at the very beginning, speaking their language in the housing element. So what we're saying actually matches with what they anticipate they're supposed to hear.
Yeah, I know you hear that we're not compliant.
Well,
And it's really hard to, your reaction is, are we doing something wrong? But most of it sounds like it's not even a there.
I know, but the Diana, we can't lose sight of they are really, really requiring multifamily plans where that can be built.
That's right.
I mean,
They brought that up
make
several
no
times.
bones about it. So there is a ton of this little nitpick stuff that I think is a lot of cleanup. And I think I referred to it of, telling our story and why we're special, or why we're unique, why we are, how we are. They want all those details, but, the rubber meets the road, it's going to be how many low income
I agree.
can we build?
So that's an excellent segue into our third category, which is dealing with multifamily and affordable housing. And the first topic we have listed here is the discussion of multifamily sites, inventory, analysis, and program language. Based on the comments and the feedback from HCD, there was some confusion about what the multifamily strategy from the town was exactly as presented in the housing element. So really a lot of the comments relative to multifamily housing weren't necessarily that it won't work. It was just not, HCD was unclear of what exactly the proposal was. So that's a big first step in responding to HCD. Now, that's putting aside the fact that the town is still considering how to incorporate multifamily sites in the housing element. So we should keep in mind the items and the questions that HCD raised from the current adopted housing element as we look at what the council is considering moving forward.
That's a quick question.
Mhm.
What do they have in their documents, a specific definition of what multifamily housing is? Could multifamily housing be a house, an ADU and a JDU where you have three different families living? Do they have a specific definition of what it is? And do we have that language?
Jeff Bradley again, M Group. Thank you. If I may, through the mayor, answer that question. We got into this recently with HCD with another client similarly situated with 100% or nearly 100% single family land uses. And they wanted to do townhouses as multifamily. And HCD said, no, that's single family attached. And so they're looking for apartments or condos.
So do they say that explicitly and do they have that language? And can you share the explicit language of what the definition of multifamily is so that we know we're all on the same page? Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
The last point that I have for the multifamily category is that HCD requested additional information on fees or exactions for multifamily development and potential constraints. I think that the problem that the town encountered was that there hasn't been multifamily housing done previously. And so how could you identify fees or exactions? I think we'll have to go back and talk to HCD about how other jurisdictions have similarly approached this. And it may come that it may be that we have to estimate what that would look like in the future and provide that kind of analysis and narrative in the housing element.
Okay.
The second item on the slide is the topic of ADUs, site inventory analysis and program language. HCD wanted further information to support the unit yield anticipated by the housing elements accessory dwelling unit strategy. I know that the town feels confident in the numbers that they're putting forward. So that's something that we're going to take back to HCD and look at the performance of the town in the past on ADU production to ensure that we're on the same page and we understand what it is that they're looking for if they're not going to accept those numbers. And then we also need to look at what additional information would be necessary to support the town's estimation of lower income ADUs.
Well-
And getting back to the programming conversation that we had previously, really understanding what HCD needs to trust the town's assertion that those numbers are legitimate and realistic.
So one of the things that, I spoke with George about, he put in a letter today. And for the people in the audience, which is what's most important, people like yourself, Zach, who you've got people living at your house, but we may not know about it. We don't know the income levels, so we can't get credit for it. So there's a lot of people in town that are putting people up, have a pool house, have somebody living in it, but we don't know about it. And so the town is going to send a letter out to the residents and ask them to please respond. So it's going to be very critical that you and your neighbors, when you get that letter, that you do respond with whether or not you're putting somebody up, whether or not you do have an ADU that we don't know about, or, they're living in a JADU in your house, and what their income level is in those categories, so we can get credit for it. Because I think there's a lot of it around here with students, with people putting up faculty members from the high schools and things like that. And we just don't know about it because they just keep it to themselves. And letting us know about this stuff does allow us to count it and show that we've got a lot more here than what people think we have. So anyway, just want to put that public request out.
Yeah, I have a question. Can you explain exactly what they mean by supporting unit yield?
Sure, that means if the housing element, have the numbers in front of me, suggests that the programs in the housing element will yield 112 very low income ADUs. What are the parts of the programs in the housing element that specifically demonstrate that that will be achievable?
So unit yield has to do with very low income.
No, just you could say unit count.
Great category. And yeah,
Okay.
I like the
Okay.
term unit yield. I think it's the number of.
There's
we
a
can-
significant goal of the housing element adoption that the town will be able to produce a certain number of units in different income categories.
Why we think that.
So when we're looking at these income categories and we're looking at the programs in the housing element, we see that a certain number are provided by ADUs, by SB9 lot splits, by development of multifamily sites. How are we getting those numbers? What is the methodology? What are the justifications and the citations that we can use for that methodology, or the proofs rather? That's what they're asking us to provide. Shall I move on?
Yeah, yeah.
Next slide,
Don't
please.
slow down.
So this next slide covers the California Environmental Quality Act compliance part of the work that we're doing. Currently, the housing element that was adopted with a categorical exemption, meaning that it didn't need substantial CEQA review because it was a programmatic document that complied with the state law. However, because the town has not yet adopted a compliant housing element, meaning that the state has accepted it, it means that the town has to pass associated zoning code updates by January 31st, 2024. Because of that process, that has expanded the CEQA review to include an initial study that we are effectively already underway. And that would evaluate the potential environmental impacts associated with the housing element, as well as zoning code modifications and any objective design standards that are also adopted. Next slide. So effectively, while you've been discussing a housing element for the past year or two, the scope is now expanded to include not just the housing element, but the initial study, which will comply with CEQA requirements, as well as the zoning code updates, and then also objective design standards. I will be leading the team on the housing element, but then we also have other planners that are working on the zoning code updates and objective design standards that you'll need. So next steps. Staff will be doing additional background research on all of these categories that are listed in the table, looking at the data requested by HCD and having further conversations with HCD on topics like the ADU numbers to make sure that we're on the same page moving forward. And then while we're doing that, council should be working on the multifamily sites situation and identifying where those might be appropriate in the town. I think for the purpose of CEQA, we're hoping that you would have some clarity on that by July 19th, 2023. And the reason for that is that in order to get the CEQA studies moving, we need a clear project description. That's important because as soon as CEQA is ready to get started and the analysis is going underway, the first step is alerting that to the public. And sharing with the public documenting exactly what the project description is. And so that's really important that we have a clear understanding to provide the public about what the multifamily site situation would include. After the project description is developed, then we'll be doing initial review for various studies that are required for the initial study in CEQA. There will also be public outreach that starts for both the objective design standards and then as well as revisions and refinements to the housing element and zoning code. So procedurally, we're looking at a series of adoption hearings in late fall to the end of 2023, with the housing element adoption occurring in November 2023 and the zoning ordinance deadline, the zoning ordinance adoption happening before the deadline, which is January 31st, 2024.
Just clarification, zoning ordinance adoption deadline, January 31st, or zoning ordinance submission?
It's adoption.
Yes, it would be adoption. So through the planning commission and the council.
That means the next mayor will have the problem.
The zoning code
Yeah.
date is distinctive from the housing element submission back to the state. The zoning code deadline of that 1 year is what Brittany mentioned, because we don't have a compliant element within 120 days.
Right.
We have 1 year to effectuate all of those zoning changes.
Okay, and we're expecting the housing element adoption and approval by HCD, or is this the adoption by council?
Council.
Right.
And that's aggressive.
Yeah.
And it's potentially could be delayed.
And so when do we
And it has
resubmit?
been delayed for
Yeah.
about 50% of the jurisdictions in Southern California,
So when would we submit then?
right? I mean, so
When
it's
you
it's a
adopt.
target. It's
Or
the
we
legal
adopt.
target. But if it doesn't happen, then it puts us in the same position as 50% of the counties and cities in Southern California.
Okay,
I think it's our goal to try and get it done on time,
I would-
because we're already not on time. So that's like a year past, so. I'm hoping that we can get something in back to HCD by November so that we can
Be done with it.
not have anything befall the town, but we'll see. Okay, we got
It's not
a lot of
right.
ground to cover.
yeah, we can't make it right, keep working on it.
I think that's the end of the staff presentation, but I do have one question through the mayor. What does the city council's identification of multifamily sites by July process look like? Who's going to lead that effort?
I'm going to turn it back to the town planner.
It'll be you and I with the council
Turn on your mic.
and so I think it would be with the city manager, the town planner, and then council and plan commission as the council would like.
So we'll bring something to the council. Probably before July, we would need them to have a conversation.
And we can have study sessions on housing sites if the council would like.
For which we would probably want to notify the entire community through a mailer saying, hey, this is a study session meeting workshop where we're going to talk about potential multifamily site identification in advance of the July 19th actual selection to close out the CEQA project description.
Will those be separate meetings from council meetings? Those will be outreach. I do have
I would
questions
encourage them to be separate.
on that chart. Are you going to go over the chart of the next steps by the dates? Because I did have questions on what those look like.
What?
They were, some points were
What-
said at
what-
this date, we'd have outreach, and I was wondering, is that public outreach and what form would that take?
The milestone.
Yeah, that chart, that.
I can put that up on the screen. Anthony,
Yeah,
if
because
you'd
I
like
had a
to do
few
that, and then
questions about how that would
can
look,
talk
and I
about that.
think the people here probably want to know too.
Oh, it's right here. I got it. Yeah, I saw this.
Give me 1 second to pull that up.
So I have another question. So the PowerPoint, did it somehow track this big blue and white spreadsheet?
The
No.
PowerPoint summarizes the staff report, which does track to the table.
And
Anthony, if you could stop
Yes.
sharing there.
well, I read the staff report, but I also read the appendix, the Town of Atherton appendix, which really had specific things that they requested.
So the table includes all of the information in the letter from HCD, which is the appendix that you're referencing, I believe.
Okay.
Okay.
It refers to page numbers. And
Those
that-
are in the housing element.
yeah, that goes back. Not, yeah, not the responses.
The way that you can track the table to the housing element letters or the
This
HCD letters.
most recent letter that we got.
is with the topic category. So for example, on the
Says
first
review.
row of the table, it says review of prior housing element. If you look at the April 4th
Fourth, would that be
HCD
number
letter,
8?
the first topic is going to be review and revision.
So that's letter A, and then B would be the next one. Okay,
Correct. And so on and so forth.
so on and so.
Now, when you go and if you go as far back and look at the October HCD letter,
Yeah,
a lot of those items aren't in the same order and
okay.
have dropped off because they were already addressed by the housing element.
But I want to just focus on
Yay.
what we have
Yeah.
yet to do.
Rick has a question.
Yeah, just following up on what you said about targeting July 19th for identification of multifamily sites. And encouraging that. Are these multifamily sites where affordable housing could be built? Or are they multifamily sites where we don't care about what kind of housing is built?
Yes, it would be the multifamily sites that would potentially add or replace or change whatever is currently in the housing element. So for example, 23 Oakwood is listed as including 4 very low income units. And the private school sites are listed as including 40. So if you choose other multifamily sites to include on the list, and they're providing units at the very low income category, in addition to, or instead of those other properties, we would need to update that table. And whatever parameters we're using to describe those sites, whether it's everything, like every property fronting on a specific type of street or more nuanced than that, we would need to include in the project description so that it's very clear to everybody that's receiving notification that the environmental review period is starting, that is what is under consideration.
Okay, but if we don't need to, if we don't choose to replace those sites, if we keep those sites, and I'm not advocating, I am absolutely advocating that we keep the sites at the schools. I'm not advocating that we keep the site at 23 Oakwood. But if we keep the sites, the bulk of which is at the schools, then we don't need to worry about coming up with other multifamily sites where affordable housing could be built.
Well, in that instance, then you would be asserting at some point that you're not changing the sites,
Do you what?
that you're not changing the sites. And
Or
that we're moving,
site.
that
One
we're
site.
moving forward with the description that's already been adopted.
Well, we might change the descriptions. I mean, there's an enormous amount of description and analysis that the HCD letter has said we need to provide. And that, like you said, that's the bulk of what they're focused on.
However, if, for example, here's a situation where you may need to think of another site. If, for example, it turns out that 23 Oakwood or the college site is deemed not feasible for one reason or another over the next couple of months,
Deemed not feasible by whom?
by a pro forma that says it's not feasible to build, or the college says we've changed our mind, we're not going to build these housing units, then you've got to identify another site to fill that gap at the very low and the low category. Those are
Right.
situations where you might need to do that.
Right. So I'm just trying to target exactly what we're talking about. So we're not just bullshitting here.
Appreciate that, Rick.
Well, anytime.
Yeah.
The 4 extremely low housing sites at Oakwood, maybe that's not feasible because we've heard from Arata that you might have trouble with that. So maybe we do remove that. And then we need to replace that 4-unit site. But if we don't get some information that the multifamily sites that we've targeted at the schools are infeasible, then we'll keep those. So it's not like we need to be looking for an enormous number of sites here. We need to look at enough to address a potential unfeasibility at Oakwood.
Okay, I want to just follow up. What would make the site at the college feasible in the eyes of HCD?
Well, what do you mean? We've got to we've declared it's feasible. We certified it in our housing element. We've gotten a letter from the college saying they want to build the site. But there's more that needs to be done. We'd like to see a conceptual design for what that housing is going to be.
Mhm.
And I hope that by July 19th, that will be available.
Okay,
But if you want to remove the college from the
No,
housing
no,
element,
I'm
then
just
maybe
saying-
we have to
would
reconsider
they
that
say,
and go
you
find
know,
some other place. But
include a
the
letter
issue
of
for me
commitment
is whether or not
financing?
it's affordable.
Yes, I think.
Because I do believe that at the schools where the property doesn't have to transfer and somebody doesn't have to pay $10 million an acre for the property, that a feasible housing could be built. But I don't believe that's possible on an R1A site.
Right.
If I may,
How-
to the mayor, honorable mayor.
go ahead.
Jeff Bradley,
Yes,
I'd just like
please.
to, we're in this full disclosure mode here, and we're new on the scene, so we can say whatever we see, right? In the existing housing element that we sent up to Sacramento, we looked back, right? The royal we, staff, consultants, past and present. We looked back 7 years and said we did 18 ADUs per year. 18. And ACD has some pretty strict protocols about how they count ADUs, and they go back 2 or 3 or 4 years max. And so then that number might change. when
Yeah,
we
but
do-
that
when
doesn't
we-
deal with the last 2 years.
With
where
respect,
we did 35
with respect,
a
let me
year.
just get my points
Let
out
him
there, then
finish,
we
please.
can, then we can debate it and everything.
Debate.
The new 6th cycle, we projected 35 per year. ACD is not going to accept that. They didn't accept that. And they're not going to, we can't just throw more information at them to get them to accept that. So in terms of where the rubber is going to meet the road, ADUs are going to come down, sites are going to need to go up. And sites are just not about meeting the RENA. It's also about fair housing, housing mobility, providing new opportunities for new people and existing people of lower incomes to live in this wonderful community. So we have to keep a broad mind about not just zeroing in on these RENA numbers. That's almost the easy part. Then it'll come down to, you don't have enough opportunities over here. You don't have enough opportunities over here. You've clustered it all right here. So it becomes very subjective, and it becomes a big negotiation with HCD. So I just want to prepare the council for that. And in terms of affordability, it's important to recognize that there's other state laws that sort of dictate what HCD can count and not count towards affordability. And the big one you will hear about is called the default density, which hopefully you've been apprised of. If certain sites meet certain criteria, namely around the density, they can automatically be counted as 100% affordable, even though we all know these sites aren't going to go all 100% affordable. But if they do go and be developed with multifamily housing, and you have a strong inclusionary housing program that requires 10, 15, 20% affordable housing, you will get that out of it, and you can count that towards your RENA. It won't meet your RENA completely. You'll have to do more to meet the numbers because the RENA is more affordable than it is market rate. All right, it's like 59% affordable. So that's a steep hill to climb. So I just want to put that out there. Like, we don't have to, if we're meeting the default density, we don't have to get into pro formas and feasibility and public versus private ownership. There's certain mechanisms that will work in the town's favor in that regard. So I just wanted to get that out there.
It's all about density, though. It's all about density.
Correct.
To have that automatically count for the.
Yeah, that's the
load.
20 units per acre.
That's a
that he's
20
talking
units per acre, and there's no place.
Can I
that
ask
we
some
have that.
process questions to you?
Still waiting for
Um,
time.
We keep hearing about like feasibility and feasibility analysis. Who does that? Is that HCD? Are you guys doing that? Are we hiring somebody to,
That's us.
that's you guys?
You hired us. to
Okay.
Help convince ACD that our strategy is feasible across the board. And feasibility really is a loaded term, because when we think of feasibility, we think of financial factors and marketability and development expectations and projects penciling out. But when you're in this regulated space of housing policy, it really comes down to meeting the statutes in state law and what they've determined to be feasible, like this whole discussion around parcel size, 1/2 acre to 10 acre. Where'd that come from? People say, oh, HCD requires this. That's actually a state law. HCD is just implementing all these state laws and they're interpreting them to the best of their ability. And you could get different interpretations from different people you talk to at HCD, just like, well, not here, obviously, but other cities, you might go in the planning department and get different interpretations based on the same zoning code. It's the exact same thing.
So I want to go back to my question, which was up on the board right now, is procedurally, because clearly we have a bunch of things out that we're going to address. Will we get back information from you before we're asked to start to make this analysis? Because you may come back and say, well, what you're missing is low income senior housing. And then that gives us what we're actually looking for. Like if we can't prove that that's an ADU, I'm making that up, but we don't know exactly what the thing is that's going to be in the end, that's going to be the no-go. In this cycle, the timeline you put up there, we have out here outreach meetings. I assume those are to the public. So can you walk through how we're going to get everyone on board with what's happening and where are the points that we'll get information back about what's working, what's not working from all this feasibility analysis?
That's a really hard one, so I'm going to turn it over to Brittany.
I'm looking at some.
So, I mean, for instance, just to follow, for instance, I mean, we're going to look at week 4 next week,
Yeah,
right?
let's walk through this.
Sites discussion and outreach meeting number 1. Has that been scheduled? No. Okay, but are we going to do it
Let them walk through it so we know
Yeah.
exactly what we're thinking and understanding what outreach actually means. So
and
let's understand let's all understand how the process is going to work.
So there are a variety of things that we'll be addressing as part of the housing element update. Most of what the council will want to focus on are the sites themselves that affect the RENA numbers, and then the implementing policies, because those are also important to HCD. A lot of the background information staff is going to take care of. And so the council won't need to spend as much energy on that. I think the energy should be spent on, the actual how we're going to meet the affordable housing requirements and then just the implementation policies.
I think they're also looking for, are we going to engage the public and when, and are we going to send flyers out? And we're going to have.
And when do we hear back too? Like in this cycle, when do we hear back on whether things went with them or didn't? I mean, if we tell them we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and this is why, and then they again say no, then that's a different thing. You know what I'm saying? So as they feed back, so where in this cycle do we reach out to the public and when do we hear back?
So we will develop an outreach program, and then we're going to develop a much more defined schedule. We're just kind of launching at this moment. I would anticipate that we would have some outreach meetings just to talk about sites and affordable housing. And then there'll also be outreach meetings for the objective design standards and then also for the zoning code. And they'll kind of be on parallel tracks. And so some might feed into the others. But yes, we anticipate that there will be quite a bit of outreach that will be part of the housing element and then the development of whatever sites are chosen.
So the whole community and the council attend these meetings and there'll be a presentation to everybody, to all of us?
Yes, we can do it that way.
I think we need to have the council decide and agree with what staff is saying or not saying at a public meeting. Then we get public input at a public meeting, which is what I think was anticipated, where we would send a letter to everybody and invite them to the meetings, just like we've done before. Sometimes they come, sometimes they don't. My concern is July, which, you scroll down, there's a bunch of stuff in July, there's a lot of people away on holiday. So it's a hard time to have meetings where we're saying we got public input
Well, as
effectively.
Elizabeth pointed out, we have public outreach meetings next week. Week 4 of May isn't that right there? It says
When is that
outreach.
supposed to
That's
happen?
next week.
And I'm not going to be here.
Those
Sorry.
have not been yet scheduled. So this was a tentative,
Oh,
Yeah.
put it up on the screen and try and work through some of the details
I
of
think,
it.
yeah, it needs some
Once
work.
they're scheduled, they'll be noticed.
there is a week 5 in May, after Memorial Day.
Okay, but we
There's
Well, that's good.
Tuesday and Wednesday.
need to get some, this needs to be fleshed out a little bit
Right.
more. Okay, that's, I think, because I think we're drilling down on something that hasn't been fleshed out. So it's thrown up against the wall for our comments.
Okay,
So I
that-
appreciate that we've made some comments. How about we move on?
Can I ask one last question before we move on? Because
No.
I didn't get the answer to, will we get a feedback from them in this cycle?
And them, you're talking about HCD, I'm
Yes.
assuming.
Do we submit feasibilities as they come, or are we gonna collect them all up and then hand them and then
They
we're
don't-
gonna,
That's what you
how
do.
does it work?
That's what you do.
What
That's
we've
what you
done
do.
with the other housing elements is staff has met with HCD to discuss different topics. And so we can have a list of questions. We'll go through the list of questions with HCD staff, and then we can report back out to the council.
Does that include ADU numbers? Because there's a big difference between what their past analysis and what we're projecting, but also we have new numbers to share that change our average. So I'm just curious, like, are you guys like negotiating those numbers or?
Yes, so that's something we can talk to HCD about. They may not accept it, they may, it just, we don't know. But what we can do is provide additional analysis and then present that and make the best case that we can to HCD, and then we'll see what they say.
So at some point, you guys will come back with us and say, you know, based on our discussions with HCD, they will probably look favorably on this kind of a number for an ADU projection.
Yes, they might give us some more direction in terms of what may be more feasible. But until we talk to HCD and then until we have more information to provide to HCD, we won't know.
Let me ask a question of the team here. Have you guys in your past housing elements developed a relationship with specific staff members at HCD that you've been in communication with? And you intend to do the same thing with ours?
So I have a question.
The warm fuzzies.
My understanding is we don't resubmit the housing element to HCD until we've put all of the zoning changes through CEQA. Is that correct?
No, they're
That's on
separate.
the
No.
timeline.
I could just say no, because the zoning changes, that's the whole year timeline, but we may adopt and submit a revised housing element to HCD prior to that's completion, because our January 31st deadline is for the land use changes. But the housing element is proposed to be submitted in November.
Yes.
Whether we've done CEQA or not.
You know, CEQA on the housing element itself would be done.
Well, what if it's not done? No, that's what I'm
Well, then it
asking.
would be pushed.
So then that's exactly what I just said.
No, the ordinance changes, the CEQA on that is different than the CEQA on the housing element.
Okay,
They-
so there's
yeah,
CEQA both
zoning.
on zoning
Yeah.
issues and there's CEQA on the
It's not
housing
for next
element.
year.
And we need to complete CEQA on the housing element before we resubmit.
Is that where we're headed? It's a little bit of a quirk here. Again, I'm not a planner. You guys are the experts in the room.
He knows enough to be dangerous.
Exactly.
So under CEQA, you have to look at the project at the highest level. And so the project at the highest level, in this case, is at the housing element level, right? Because everything that happens below that, whether we're talking about zoning changes, objective design standards, updates to your fee schedule, whatever, if it's flowing out of the housing element as like a work program and strategies and programs, that's the project. And so we do the environmental review at the housing element level that will cover the housing element. And by its nature, anything you do after that, that's consistent with the housing element, even if it's a zone change, if that was envisioned in the housing element, the CEQA document that was done at the housing element will cover that downstream action. If at the zoning stage, you say, no, we don't want to do 20 units per acre, we want to do 25, that would be a little different than what was envisioned in the housing element, and you might have to update your CEQA a little bit. But the idea is to do CEQA once at the highest level of the project that follows all the implementing actions, and you just point back. to
But that
CEQA.
assumes the housing element is a constant.
Is a constant.
Well,
Well,
what if the housing element changes? I mean, we've got a housing element right now. We're doing CEQA on the housing element that we have right now. If that stays, then we'll complete that CEQA on the housing element, I understand. And at that point, assuming that the language is done and whatever program decisions we make are made, then we'll resubmit to HCD. But if there are housing decision changes in terms of what is included in the housing element, then doesn't that change the housing element?
Correct.
And if that housing element has been changed, don't we have to do CEQA on that?
We'd have to interrogate the question of whether this new change fits under the CEQA
That we've
process.
already approved?
Yeah, or not, and then go from there.
So if it hasn't, then we'll have to redo CEQA. And if if it's close enough, then we'll just go with it.
Correct.
Yes, and it'll be mostly about the housing numbers, the actual number of units that would have the most impact on whether we have to redo the CEQA. So if there are minor text changes on a policy or program or some analysis, then we wouldn't have to redo CEQA. But just in terms of timing, so you want to do the CEQA first, preferably right before the housing element, and then the CEQA can cover the zoning ordinance that can come later.
My fear is what I don't want to have happen, I'll say in total layman's terms, is what I don't want to have happen is we're assuming right now that all of the things we've proposed, we're just going to convince them and we're going to provide the background to say, yes, it's fine. As they fall off, will we hear about them? So if all of a sudden they say, this one you can't include and you're now short X number of units, because I don't want to go into this meeting in July. We haven't heard the feasibility of the ones we submitted. And then we say, oh, we're still good. And then all of a sudden we have to come up with a whole bunch of other properties. I don't want that to happen. So how do we not have that happen?
I think part of it will be having conversations with HCD and just kind of having more of an explanation of what we're doing. Because one of the things that I noticed in the letter is they seem to be a little confused in terms of what we're doing with the PFS. They seem to have thought that we're doing a conditional use permit, and we don't require a conditional use permit now. All we require is environmental review. And we're changing that to be completely ministerial with objective design standards. So I think clarifying that, and then also explain to HCD that we're already in the process of developing objective design standards, and we're also gonna start the zone changes. I mean, I think that will help in part. That doesn't necessarily mean that they will agree with all the numbers, and there still may be additional sites that the council may need to consider. But I think just having that explanation and having us explaining what's going on with the housing element will go a long way.
And is that the follow-up meeting that is identified as week 4 of May? That's scheduling, but it's scheduling a follow-up meeting with HCD.
Yes, so
Housing
we'll do-
element clarification.
yes, so we'll start working on some of the changes to the housing element, and then we'll create a list of questions and talking points, and then we'll schedule a meeting with HCD.
Okay. Good, okay. All right, what's next?
Public comment, I believe.
Okay, public comment. Seeing none, we will close it, public comment, then before we do that, any public comment with hands raised, please?
Nothing. I just posted a message, but.
All right, we'll close public comment. This is kind of a receive.
Can I ask I don't know if this is appropriate to ask, you're sighing deeply, but it is important or I wouldn't even bring it up, okay?
You just keep asking, and a lot of times you're asking the same question
This is
over
not
and
a
over
simple
again.
question.
Okay,
I was gonna
go
ask.
ahead, go ahead.
I was gonna ask if we could request that the staff look ahead to find out some of the things that are, so for example, on the Gilmore House, we know we have some issues that are no's on that. What I don't want to have happen is if we all of a sudden at the 12th hour have to come up with low income housing for seniors or some specific thing after they go through all this. And then we start to find out if it's feasible to get, because we have some issues about whether or not we can use the property, what its impact is on the park and all of that. So can we
said
request that the staff?
We
to
said
look
we
at
were
that?
gonna reach out. I think there was gonna be a reach out to Stanford and talk to them about this. I don't know whether or not that's been done, but that's, that's,
No, because we
That's
nixed
why my
the whole
question-
thing.
The council nixed the Gilmore
Nixed it.
House entirely.
Yes.
So if you want staff to do some of
So
that behind the scenes
Bring that up
inquiry,
again like that.
you need
I
to
think
provide
is-
us with some direction to do
okay,
that.
yes.
Right,
okay.
so I'm
Great.
asking, are we willing to
Okay.
consider
No.
having them do background stuff so we're not in the 12th hour, not knowing that things can't count?
No,
I don't think it's
No.
on the agenda for tonight.
no.
I don't think
Can't
we
do
should,
that
we,
later.
yeah, we don't want to do that right now. I think that, you know, that we had a vote on it and we also said, you know, we are where we are, okay? And so if we find out that we're not where we are, then we're gonna have to come back and public notice and move forward.
I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
I know I've been negative about this multifamily housing stuff because I think that it's extremely difficult to build any multifamily housing that's affordable. I think you can build multifamily housing, and I think there's a market for it in Atherton. I have absolutely no doubt that there are people who live on 1 acre lots or even less that would love to move into a townhouse arrangement where they don't have to take responsibility for their property. But I don't believe that if somebody has to buy that land, that it's going to be affordable. So notwithstanding those comments, I want to be very clear. I think that it is absolutely critical for the council to come up with a compliant housing element. And I think this council is committed to doing that. I mean, we filed something January 31st that we believed was compliant. And I think that the request from HCD for much greater analysis, frankly, is pretty much a good request. I think there was a lot more analysis needed to support why it's hard to build affordable housing in Atherton, and we need to lay that out in spades. I do hear from your comments that it's not really what's feasible in the sense of what we would all understand feasibility to be in the English language. It's based on the standard set by HCD as to what constitutes affordability. And so for them, that may be if you zone something at 20 units an acre, then it's affordable. And we can put in place various things to maybe not have it be 20%, but have a much higher percentage of affordability. And I'm totally consistent with intending to comply with the HCD requirements so that we have a compliant housing element. I do believe that we can principally do that with housing at the schools. And I think we've talked about rezoning to authorized apartment buildings to be built at the schools, and we need to do that.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So we will close this item.
Motion to
And
adjourn.
the next one is council reports and comments or any future agenda items. What's not on the agenda is public comments, but we close with public comments. So are there any other public comments before we adjourn? Seeing none, I'll close public comments. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, everybody. For over and over and over.